Sick of getting blisters? Stop slipping and just be comfortable with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Great fit, great comfort, lots of grip, and an even better price. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
I think the general assumption when it comes to buying a new pair of football boots is that if you spend more, you get more, or at least get better quality. But is that actually true? To be way more specific, should you spend $230 on the Copa Pure 2 Elite or $130 on the New Balance 442 version 2 Pro? Both more traditionally styled boots with leather uppers, with the major question being, is the Copa really $100 more football boot? With the Copa Pure 2 Elite, a boot that has recently undergone a name change by the way, so the original launch color in blue goes by the Copa Pure 2.1, same product, different name. These bear a retail price of $230 and are your alternate top-end option in the new Copa lineup. There is a $250 Pure Plus model that sits above it, and of course a takedown model in the Pure 2 Pro, but those don't fit very well and honestly don't even come close to comparing to the two boots that we're talking about in this video. Where the 442 is a bit more of a standalone product in New Balance's lineup, there is technically a model below it, however the quality is nowhere near as good as these are, and honestly for 130 bucks, the value for money is so undeniable, especially considering unlike pretty well every other major brand, this is very much a New Balance thing, you can actually get these in regular as well as wide fit. So effectively two different options at this very reasonable retail price of 130 bucks. Both boots, by the way, you can get below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the links down below. Now, like I mentioned earlier, these are both traditionally designed football boots by modern standards. And what I mean by that is you get a traditional U-throat construction, meaning that there's a standalone tongue with the laces more or less running directly down the middle. Both of these boots also featuring natural leather uppers. And speaking of the uppers, it's pretty undeniable that the finishing quality of the Copas compared to the 442 is just better, but that should be expected at almost double the price. What you're getting here is their fusion skin material, which is something that we've been getting from the Copa line for the last several generations now, combining natural calfskin leather in the forefoot that is more or less seamlessly transitioning into a synthetic material through the midfoot, with the tongue itself also being a padded synthetic, of course, all coming together by way of a nice deep central lacing system. The leather itself is very thin, very soft. However, the boot as a whole does end up taking on a much bulkier feel than I think you might expect, especially based on how sleek these look. And of course, the main complaint that so many people have had, especially considering the $230 price tag, is that it's not kangaroo leather. And I've said this in past videos, since the Copa transitioned away from K leather, is that the calfskin they're using is still pretty much as soft as anything. However, from a touch perspective, while I think they're really good, they are far from the nicest leather boots that I've ever tried. And the reason why I say that is they're a little bit lacking in balance for a pair of leather football boots, in that the leather in the forefoot and toe box is super thin, which feels great, but then as you move into the midfoot, the synthetic they've used as well as the construction of the football boot makes them feel a little bit bulkier and chunkier than I personally would have liked, which is why I much prefer the Pure 2 Plus over the Pure Elite. But then you're talking about a football boot that costs $250 rather than $230. Where the 442, like I mentioned, certainly isn't as premium looking in a lot of ways. However, you're getting really good quality kangaroo leather through the forefoot that has a nice thickness to it. If you're looking for that padded leather touch on the ball, this does that extremely well. And then of course, you can see the seam very clearly from the forefoot back. It transitions into a synthetic leather material with a central lacing system, U-throat design, and standalone tongue, which is admittedly a lot thinner than what you're going to find from the synthetic leather on the sides of the midfoot, but it doesn't seem to hurt the overall feel of the football boot. And in terms of consistency of thickness, while it's very noticeable that the kangaroo leather at the front is way softer than everything else, the general thickness remains the same pretty much all the way through, and for whatever reason, they don't feel anywhere near as bulky as what you're going to find from the Copas. So for $100 less, the feel of the leather, in my opinion, is better, and the overall consistency of the touch, in my opinion, again, does feel a lot nicer. When it comes to sole plates and stud patterns, there's really not a lot to separate these two. The sole plates are entirely made out of plastic and both generally have a more flexible feel to them. When you're talking about the positioning of the studs themselves, they are virtually identical between the two, with the main difference being the shape of the studs, where on the Copas, you of course are getting that recycled sole plate and stud pattern from the Adidas Nemesis that was discontinued quite a few years ago, but brought back for this new generation of Copa. You can see the stud shape is kind of like a half circle with a bladed edge. That does give this a slightly more aggressive feel than what you're going to find from the New Balance, but still providing that freedom to twist and pivot. So it is a nice blend of being traditional while also feeling quite modern, where of course the New Balance, they didn't mess around. They just went with conical studs that are fairly narrow in profile. So despite their traditional look, they still dig in really nicely and provide fairly aggressive traction. I would say the choice between these two is more so going to be based around personal preference. But again, if I'm personally deciding, I actually prefer the feel of the sole plate and stud pattern on the New Balances versus the Copas. And then there's the weight, where granted, I don't think many people buying this style of football boot are overly concerned with how light they are, but there is a noticeable difference between these two, which you'll see right now on the scale. Starting off with the Copa Pure 2 Elite, they weigh in at 8.2 ounces, the equivalent of 233 grams, which is by no means heavy, but definitely not as light as most top-end models out there. Then we'll throw on the New Balance 442 version 2 Pro, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.8 ounces, the equivalent of 193 grams. Which, to put that into perspective, here is a top-of-the-line Nike Mercurial Vapor 15 Elite Speed Boot in a size 9.5 US. These guys weigh in at 6.75 ounces, the equivalent of 191 grams. In other words, only 2 grams lighter than the 442 for effectively double the price. Again, weight's not everything, but it is pretty interesting that for 130 bucks, you can get something that is as light as the current elite crop of speed boots. When it comes to the fit and feel on feet, despite both of these boots being pretty similar on paper, they do feel quite a bit different. And I touched on it a little bit earlier in the video, where I feel like the Copa is maybe a little bit lacking in balance, where the leather in the forefoot and toe box area is thin, borderline delicate feeling, and just very precise. It feels premium, but what they've done through the midfoot makes the boot feel significantly more kind of chunky and bulky than you might expect, where the 442 is pretty consistent all the way through. The leather in the forefoot and toe box area is certainly softer and more padded feeling than what you're going to find from the Copas, which would be my preference, but at the end of the day, personal preferences do vary from person to person, with the New Balance definitely having the more padded feel all the way through, where the Copas are padded through the midfoot and then thin at the front, which is not something that I'm personally a fan of. So in terms of just overall feel on feet, I do prefer what New Balance have done here. From a shaping perspective, I also really like the options that New Balance gives you, in that because both of these boots do have that deep central lacing system with the U-throat construction, there's plenty of adjustability. However, the New Balance you can get in regular as well as wide width variations. The one that I'm wearing right here is the regular width model, which I think will be suitable for the vast majority. But if you did have ridiculously wide feet and needed some extra width and volume, the fact that you have that option is fantastic and really makes this accessible to just about everybody. If I were going to give some points to the Copas over the 442s, it would be in the heel. I just prefer the more traditional, slightly more padded heel design of the Copa versus the more sculpted padding that you get in the 442, but that's more of a preference thing rather than a better or worse situation. I just prefer a slightly softer heel liner in general, but again, both of these boots are very comfortable. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing both of these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So regardless of which one you decide to go for, true to size is what I would strongly recommend. In terms of fit and feel though, I just think the 442 offers the better modern leather football boot experience. So in conclusion, these are both really good football boots. However, head to head in almost every single area, I think the 442 is just that little bit better. Are they the best leather football boots on the market? No, definitely not. And if I were comparing these to the $250 Copa Pure 2 Plus, I would prefer those Copas over these. However, it then once again becomes a question, are those Copas genuinely worth double the price of the 442? I guess that's for you to decide.